Most stories begin with someone looking for love, for purpose, for something lost. But this one began with a man who had long since stopped searching. A man whose heart had grown tired from chasing hope. A man who had folded his grief like old clothes and packed it deep within the silence of winter. His name was Eli West. It was late October when the snow arrived early in Willow Creek Valley. Thick, blinding, and solemn. Even the wind moved with reverence, as if carrying the hushed prayers of 1,000 souls. It slid through the trees like an old man, weary and wise, and when it whispered, it spoke of things long buried. Eli stood on the edge of his weathered porch, gloved hands cradling a chipped mug of coffee. Before him stretched acres of cold white silence. The barn leaned just a little more that year, its wooden bones creaking with age. Still like Eli, it had not yet collapsed. He took a slow sip. Another morning, another sunrise without her, and then he saw them. 2 small forms huddled beneath the lean-to beside the barn. Still, silent, forgotten. At first, they looked like bundles of old firewood wrapped in rags, discarded by someone too cruel or too broken to care. But then Eli's breath caught. He blinked. The frost stung his eyes, but what he saw pierced through his soul like lightning. Children. 2 little girls, no older than 6, barefoot, barely dressed, their skin pale with cold, their tiny limbs frozen into each other as if trying to disappear inside the only warmth they had left. Each other. Flannel shirts clung to them, soaked through and stiff with ice. Their tights had holes where skin peeked through, chapped and blue. Matted golden hair framed their flushed cheeks, and one of them, the one whose eyes still fluttered open, stared at him, not pleading, not crying, just existing. Jesus, Eli breathed, the mug slipping from his hand and shattering on the porch. He stepped forward, the gravel groaning under his boots. 20 feet out, his heart pounded louder than the wind. Closer now. He could see the second girl wasn't moving at all. He crouched down slowly, careful not to frighten them. "Hey," he whispered, his voice catching. "It's okay. I'm not here to hurt you." The girl with open eyes didn't flinch. She blinked, and a single tear, frozen to her lashes, glinted in the gray light. She tried to speak, but no sound came. Eli reached forward and touched the edge of the ragged blanket they'd clutched to themselves. It was thin, patterned with tiny faded flowers. A monogram stitched into the edge, W. That single letter felt heavier than stone. He gently gathered the frozen bundle into his arms. So light, so silent. No child should ever be this cold. No child should ever be this quiet. Inside the cabin, the fire crackled in the stove. Eli set them down on his old leather couch, layered them with thick blankets pulled from a cedar chest. He stoked the flames until the cast iron groaned, then rummaged for towels, warm clothes, anything. The twin with open eyes flinched when he touched her shoulder. "I know, sweetheart," he murmured. "You're safe now." He turned to the still girl, her skin pale as frostbite. His fingers shook as he checked her pulse. There. Faint, but there. He closed his eyes, exhaling a breath he didn't realize he'd held. "Thank you," he whispered to the ceiling. Whether to God, fate, or the wife he'd lost, even he didn't know. When he opened his eyes, the conscious girl was still watching him. "What's your name?" he asked gently. No answer. "Can you speak? Can you nod?" Stillness. Then, just barely, her chin dipped. Eli nodded back, lips trembling. "That's good. That's really good." She shifted, her hand slipping from beneath the blanket to rest on his. Her tiny fingers curled, just enough to hold. And Eli, he didn't move, didn't breathe, because in that single act of trust, in the whisper of fingers over skin, something in him cracked open. That night the blizzard howled, but inside the cabin, warmth battled the storm. Eli dragged a mattress from the loft and laid it near the stove. He nestled the girls beside him, wrapping them in quilts, as though his body alone could shield them from the cold, inside and out. Sometime after midnight, the wind rose to a crescendo. It sounded like whispers, not words, memories. Eli turned. The girls were asleep, One curled around the other protectively, their cheeks now kissed with color, their breath steady. And then, a sound, so soft he almost missed it. "Daddy." A whisper. Not from the wind, not the stove. A word. He froze. Had he heard right? He turned to them, heart aching. He couldn't tell which one had said it. Maybe even they didn't know. But it didn't matter, because in that moment, everything changed. He brushed a lock of snow-stiffened hair from her forehead. "You're safe," he said. "I promise." He didn't know where they came from. He didn't know why. But he knew this. They were his now. If not by blood, then by every beat of his fractured heart. Juliet Hale hadn't listened to music since the day they handed her a folded flag. Her late husband, Captain Nathan Hale, had loved music, especially Chopin. But after the military funeral and the unbearable silence that followed, she packed her grief behind the piano and taught only others how to play. She hadn't touched a key for 5 years. So when Eli called the next morning, his voice rough, trembling, uncertain, something in her shifted. "I found them," he said. "2 girls. Out in the snow. They won't speak. I just thought maybe music." "I'll come," she replied before he could finish. The cabin smelled of cinnamon and firewood. The girls sat curled on a rug by the hearth, swaddled in oversized sweaters. One fidgeted with yarn. The other stared into the flames. Juliet stood in the doorway, still. These weren't children in the middle of a storm. They were what came after the storm. The wreckage, the silence, the ache. She approached slowly. "I'm Juliet," she said, crouching. "I'm a music teacher." No reaction. She nodded toward the upright piano in the corner. "That's a beautiful old piano. Do you know what it sounds like?" Maisie blinked. Mara didn't move. Eli stood behind Juliet, hat in hand, like a man asking the world's permission to feel again. "May I try something?" she asked. "Of course." Juliet sat down, wiped dust from the keys, and rested her hands, trembling, on ivory she hadn't touched in half a decade. She didn't play Chopin. She didn't even play a song. Just a lullaby. A melody she'd once hummed to herself while Nathan was deployed. Gentle, wandering, full of longing. Then something miraculous happened. A second pair of hands joined hers, small and sure. "Maisie." She pressed notes. Not in time. Not perfectly. But in harmony. Juliet froze. Eli stepped forward, stunned. Juliet raised a hand to silence him. She played again. Maisie followed. Then Mara stood. Without instruction, the twins sat side by side and began to play. No lessons. No scales. No rules. Just music. Raw, instinctual, remembered. They wove through the lullaby like 2 birds in flight, watching, nodding, breathing together. Juliet let her hands fall into her lap. She watched them, eyes glistening. When they finished, silence fell like snow. "What just happened?" Eli asked, awed. "They're communicating," Juliet said, voice thick. "Through music." He looked down at the girls, at their scarred wrists, at the unspoken stories buried in their silence. "You don't find children like this by accident." Juliet nodded. "They need structure. Someone to help them reclaim their voices." Eli shook his head. "I'm not sure I'm that person." "You brought them out of the snow," Juliet whispered. "Don't sell yourself short." She glanced back at the piano. "I haven't played in 5 years," she said. "Not since Nathan." Eli said nothing, but his eyes said, "I know." She stepped toward the door. "I'll come back tomorrow." And then she was gone. The cocoa they'd meant to drink sat forgotten. But the music stayed. Eli couldn't sleep that night. He lay on the mattress, watching firelight dance across the ceiling. The girls slept beside him. 2 pieces of a broken puzzle, finally home. He closed his eyes. The word echoed again. Daddy. He hadn't been called that in 3 years. Not since Leah. Not since the miscarriage. Not since Mary walked away. But now, 2 girls. 1 faint letter on a blanket. A melody without a name. A second chance, delivered by the storm. And this was only the beginning. While the twin girls slept upstairs and the snow outside turned to soft, slanting rain, Eli West moved through his cabin with the kind of quiet purpose only a man accustomed to loneliness can carry. He wasn't tidying for guests. He was searching for stillness. Maybe even clarity. He hadn't done a thorough cleaning in months. Dust had settled like a memory on every surface, and the faint tracks of 2 small sets of feet now marked the wooden floor like ghostly whispers, reminders that something sacred had entered his home. He was scrubbing beneath the window seat, where the light fell pale and tired, when the leg of a stool snagged unexpectedly. A floorboard shifted with a muted creak, raised slightly, swollen from winter dampness. Curious, Eli crouched. His fingers brushed along the edge, revealing a loose plank warped by time. With cautious hands, he pried it up. Below, among cobwebs and the torn remains of a mouse-nibbled scarf, lay a rusted tin box. Time had dented its corners and sealed its lid, as if it had been forgotten by everyone but the house itself. Eli eased it out and sat back on his heels, heart already stirring. Using the edge of a flathead screwdriver, he popped the lid. Inside, a child's crayon drawing, a faded photograph, and a letter yellowed with years. He knew the drawing instantly. 2 girls, stick figures, stood before a piano. Above their heads floated crooked halos, and in the corner, so childlike yet intentional, a blue butterfly. The sight of it lodged a lump in his throat. Beneath it, a photo. 2 little girls smiling on either side of a much younger Juliet Hale. All 3 were laughing. It looked like summer, sun in their hair, seashells in their hands. One child wearing a bracelet made of buttons. On the back, written in pencil, Silver Pine Music Retreat, June 2015. Eli blinked hard, his breath shallow. He unfolded the letter. Underscore to whomever finds this. If something's happened to me, and God help us it might, I need someone to know the truth. Maisie and Mara aren't just gifted. They're a miracle. Not just musically. Though, yes, they hear things others can't. They were born at 25 weeks, survived seizures, months in the NICU, months of silence. Then one day they began singing, before they could even speak. They're mine. They've saved me more times than I can count. But I'm scared. Someone's watching us. I've seen the same car 3 nights in a row. I don't know if it's their father. I don't know if it's the man he owes. But I know we have to run. If you find this, please. Love them. Keep them safe. Tell them I never stopped listening. C_. Eli sat motionless for a long time. The wind outside had faded, but the thunder inside him roared. The W embroidered on the girl's blanket, the scar on Mara's wrist, the music, the butterfly. It all meant something, and he had to know more. He stood abruptly, the box still open on the floor, and reached for his coat. Juliet opened the door, still dusted in flour, her apron smeared with the effort of baking, something she swore she didn't do. You said you didn't bake, Eli said, breathless, half smiling despite the heaviness pressing on his chest. I don't, she replied, her brow furrowed. But kids make you try strange things. He held out the letter. She read it once, then again. The color drained from her face. I taught them, she whispered. Silver Pine. That's summer music retreat. I thought they looked familiar, but they were so little then. She touched the butterfly in the drawing gently, like it might disappear if she breathed too hard. We used that image in our trauma resilience workshops. Blue was the color of trust. Eli's voice dropped. The mother, she was scared. Juliet nodded, eyes distant. Someone was following them. The weight of that truth sat thick in the space between them. Then, softly, I want to help. But if this is tied to a custody issue, or worse, we can't pretend they don't exist. I'm not pretending, Eli said, voice firm. I'm protecting. She looked at him, really looked, and saw the man behind the flannel and tired eyes. Not just the one who'd rescued 2 girls from the snow, but the one still carrying the weight of a daughter he never got to hold, a family lost in silence. You're not alone in this, she said gently. Neither are you, he replied. A quiet smile crept between them, fragile but warm. Looks like we're both stuck now. I can think of worse places to be stuck, he murmured. Outside, the rain turned back to snow, and between their two hearts, something long frozen began to melt. The road to Silverpine had become more memory than path, half swallowed by gravel and sagebrush, the remnants of forgotten winters. It wound into the hills like a question no one had dared ask in years. Juliet sat in the passenger seat of Eli's truck, the tin box clutched in her lap as if it still had breath. In the back seat, Maisie and Mara were nestled under a quilt, faces pressed to foggy windows, watching the landscape drift by like pieces of a dream they weren't sure belonged to them. "You sure about this?" Eli asked, his voice quiet. "No," Juliet admitted, "but we need to try." They had packed cocoa in a thermos, spare coats, a notebook Juliet hadn't touched since the retreat, the last page written in Nathan's hand. "You teach light where others forget it exists." She hadn't read it since his funeral. Until now. At noon, they reached what was left of Silverpine. Once a sanctuary nestled against the lake, the retreat had stood proud, a haven for healing, music, and belonging. But now the church was collapsed, the cabins hollowed. The air hung heavy with soot and loss. The fire had taken everything. Maisie stepped out first, boots crunching on scorched gravel. Mara followed, holding tight to her sister's hand. Juliet knelt between them, her voice tender. "Do you remember this place?" The girls didn't speak, but their eyes wandered toward a half-hung red swing, the outline of a garden where blue butterflies once bloomed in June, and the ashes of a piano Juliet herself had played. Eli brushed dust from an old bench and found, carved into the wood beneath the seat, two small names. Maisie plus Mara Summer. Juliet's breath caught. She touched the worn letters. "They were here," she whispered. Maisie tugged Mara's sleeve and pointed to something glinting in the debris. Eli stepped forward and retrieved it. A small bronze bell, bent and soot-dusted. Juliet took it into her palm, overcome. "I gave this to a little girl. She'd stopped speaking after something terrible, but she rang this whenever she felt safe." Maisie reached out and rang the bell. Once. Soft, fragile, but clear. And in that sound was everything. Memory, healing, and a voice that didn't need words. Inside the ruined lodge, they found little that had survived. Burnt notebooks, warped utensils, no electronics, no files. Whatever the fire hadn't destroyed, time had erased. But behind a sagging closet door, Juliet found a sealed storage bin. Inside, water-damaged photo albums, art supplies, and one hand-sewn memory quilt, each patch signed by a child. She opened it carefully. Her fingers trembled. Maisie and Mara's names were there, in crooked red thread, stitched beside a butterfly and piano keys. "Their mother must have done this," Juliet whispered, clutching it to her chest. Eli sat beside her. The girls stood in the doorway, sunlight painting their silhouettes across the soot. "This was a safe place once," he said quietly. "It still is," Juliet replied, "as long as we remember why it mattered." They sat in silence until Eli spoke, voice barely above the wind. "I lost a daughter. Leah. Miscarriage. 3 years ago. My wife left 6 months later. Said she couldn't live in a house with a ghost." Juliet's eyes welled. "I'm sorry," she said. "I kept a nursery," Eli added. "Still do." She nodded gently. "You do it because you're not ready to admit you never stopped waiting." He looked at the girls again, Mara drawing shapes in soot. "Do you believe in second chances?" he asked. Juliet's voice was soft but sure. "I believe some of us never get a first one. So yes, I believe in as many chances as a heart can carry." Maisie walked over, holding a charred piece of piano wood. On it, she had drawn a perfect blue butterfly. "They remember," Juliet whispered, touching it. "They remember what it felt like to be safe." Eli wrapped an arm around her. "Then maybe," he said, "it's time we give them a home where they can feel it again." The letter arrived folded and sterile, wedged between a seed catalog and an unpaid utility bill. Notice of welfare concern, unregistered minors. In-home visit scheduled. Eli stood at the mailbox, snow stinging his cheeks, the weight of the paper a stone in his chest. Someone had told. Inside, The girls were tracing leaves on construction paper. Juliet sat with them, smiling, until she saw his face. He handed her the letter without a word. "They're coming Friday," she read aloud. "That's 3 days." Eli sank into a chair. "They're not mine, Juliet. No paperwork. No proof. Just 2 girls who showed up in the snow." Juliet placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "You stayed. You fed them. You listened. You gave them warmth when no one else did. That counts." He looked up, weary. "I'm not enough." She smiled gently. "You're more than enough." And for 3 days, they cleaned, scrubbed, cooked, fixed every crooked drawer, hung up every drawing, made the house not just presentable, but a home. Because sometimes the only family worth fighting for is the one that finds you. As Juliet filed the paperwork with the county clerk, hoping the ashes of old records might still yield fragments of truth, Eli worked in quiet purpose, mending the splintered railing upstairs. The tension hung like a low mist in the house, and the girls, sensitive as ever, sensed it. They spoke less, moved more softly, but never wandered far from either of them. Thursday evening arrived draped in snowfall. Juliet sat at the kitchen table with the girls, folding delicate paper butterflies as Eli stirred a pot of tomato soup and grilled cheese browned on the stove. Maisie folded her butterfly into the shape of a heart. Mara pressed hers into Juliet's hand. Juliet leaned down and kissed the crown of her head. "They'll see," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. "They'll see what I see." The caseworker arrived at 9 on the dot. Her name was Michelle Carver. She looked like someone carved from procedure. A tan overcoat, glasses low on her nose, clipboard at the ready. But her eyes, Eli noticed, were kind. Tired but kind. She greeted the girls gently, kneeling to their level, and accepted the drawings they handed her with soft grace. "Butterflies," she smiled. "My favorite." She moved through the house, examining food storage, locks, sleeping arrangements, safety plans. She paused at the pantry door, where Eli had taped the emergency contact list. Her eyes lingered at the fridge, 2 crayon drawings labeled Dad, stuck with crooked magnets. Juliet brewed tea while Michelle sat at the kitchen table, leafing through notes. Her voice was gentle, but the words landed like cold wind. "I don't see any documentation," she said. "We know," Eli replied. "Juliet's requested archived records. The nonprofit that ran Silverpine no longer exists, but we found their names on a memory quilt. We're not imagining this." Michelle gave a small nod. "I believe you." That surprised him. She closed the folder. "What concerns me isn't whether you love them. It's whether the system can accept love without documentation." Juliet leaned forward. "May I speak?" Michelle nodded. "I've worked with children most of my life. Kids who lost more than names and birth certificates. These girls have been failed before. We can't let them fall through the cracks again just because a filing cabinet went up in flames." Michelle studied her. "Are you a legal guardian?" "I'm a friend." "More than a friend," Eli added. "She's their teacher, their advocate, and the only one who made this house sing again." Michelle turned to where the girls were quietly playing with wooden animals Juliet had brought them. She stood, walked over, and knelt. "Maisie, Mara," she said softly, "do you want to stay here?" The girls looked at each other, then at Juliet, then at Eli. In perfect silence, they nodded. Maisie reached for Eli's hand. Mara tugged on Michelle's sleeve and pointed to a painting, a navy blue butterfly Juliet had helped them finish. Michelle rose slowly. "I have to file a temporary review," she said. "But if this goes to court, I'll testify." Juliet's voice cracked. "You will?" Michelle smiled faintly. 30 years on this job. You don't always witness something real. But today I did." She turned to Eli. "Don't screw it up." Then she left, her footsteps soft as the snow drifting outside. That night, Juliet and Eli sat on the porch wrapped in quilts, mugs steaming in their hands. "I don't think I breathed the whole visit," Juliet said, a laugh catching in her throat. "I thought you were perfect," Eli replied. "We're not out of the woods yet." "No," he agreed, but at least we're walking through them together. She tilted her face to the stars, quiet and clean above the Wyoming dark, and for the first time in years, let herself believe she didn't have to keep walking alone. Inside, the girls slept hand in hand beneath a quilt sewn with hope, and the house felt less like shelter and more like home. The first time Juliet stepped into Eli's workshop, she sneezed twice. Mid-morning sunlight slanted through a cracked barn window, catching dust like gold flakes suspended midair. Tools lined the walls in imperfect symmetry, and sawdust layered every surface like second skin. The air smelled of cedar oil and memory. "Sorry about the mess," Eli muttered, wiping his hands on a rag. Juliet smiled behind her sleeve. "I teach children, Eli. You think sawdust scares me." He grinned, sheepish. "Didn't expect a box labeled lavender oils and citrus peels. Thought you were just bringing muffins. I'm full of surprises." Maisie and Mara trailed behind her. Maisie clutched a jar of dried rose petals. Mara held a tiny bucket of beeswax pellets. Since Michelle's visit, their steps had grown lighter, their laughter less guarded. Not certainty, but the scent of something close, possibility. Soap-making was Juliet's idea. "I used to make it with my grandmother," she'd said. "It's healing, creative. The girls will love it." Eli had shrugged. "All I've got is tools and time." "Perfect," Juliet had said. "Let's build something. Together." That word "together" settled somewhere inside him, warm and fragile. Eli built the molds from repurposed pine. Juliet guided the girls in mixing scents and colors. Lavender clashed with peppermint until it didn't. They laughed until tears lined their cheeks. They set up a folding table near the back window. Juliet brought an old typewriter to stamp wrappers. The girls doodled a logo, a butterfly, its wings shaped like musical notes. "What should we call it?" Eli asked. Juliet looked at the hardening bars of soap, lavender swirls nestled beside amber gold. She glanced at the twins, twirling barefoot through curls of sawdust. "Ashes and lavender," she whispered, "because that's where we started, and where we're going." Eli watched her for a long moment, then nodded. "Ashes and lavender it is." Word spread. Juliet posted a few pictures on a community page. Within 2 days, they had 6 custom orders. By the weekend, the local shop owner Mara Denny stopped by. "People want real things," she said, inhaling deeply. "Not mass-produced lemon lies. What you're making smells like hope." Juliet smiled. "That's our secret ingredient." Eli snorted. "And here I thought it was goat milk." Their days began with reading at the kitchen table. Afternoons in the workshop, shaping soaps, cutting wrappers. Music always played, soft, gentle, enough for Eli to still hear the hum of his saw. They became rhythm. They became family. One cold Thursday morning, Juliet found Eli staring at a small carved box, a prototype for a gift set. His hand trembled slightly. "What is it?" she asked. "Leah," he murmured. "That's what we would have named her." Juliet said nothing, stepping closer. "I never even wrote her name. Not on the nursery. Not on paper. Thought it would make it easier. It didn't. Just made it quieter." She took his hand gently. "Let's name this one after her." Eli blinked. "Lavender and cedar." Juliet continued. "Warmth and strength. The Leah collection." He smiled quietly. "She'd have liked you." That night, snow kissed the window panes. The 4 of them sat around the table, wrapping soap bars and handwriting tiny tags. Maisie wrote, "Handmade with love, Willow Creek, WY." Mara drew butterflies. Juliet played Nathan's favorite vinyl. Eli reached for her hand under the table. She didn't let go. Outside, the wind stirred the pines. Inside, the house smelled of sawdust, lavender, and something more enduring, belonging. The wind roared like a beast outside, and Eli stood bracing himself against the echoing noise inside his chest. The storm outside was fierce, but it was nothing compared to the storm inside him, the one that whispered doubts and haunted him with questions that never had answers. Juliet stepped across the room with quiet resolve. Her hand found his chest, palm warm against his trembling heart. Then we rebuilt, she said softly, anchoring him. Together. Eli looked into her eyes, shadows of old wounds and fresh fears clouding his gaze. What if I'm not enough? Juliet didn't hesitate. You are, she said, voice steady. I know you are, because they're still here. They laugh when you enter a room. They sleep soundly under your roof. They reach for your hand without hesitation. You didn't just save them, Eli. You made them feel safe. And that's more than most people ever manage in this world. He dropped his head, the storm within howling louder. Juliet leaned closer, her voice now a tender murmur. And maybe, she added, her breath just above a whisper, maybe they've saved you too. That night, with the storm howling outside and the power flickering, they moved the mattress down to the living room floor. The four of them, Eli, Juliet, Maisie, and Mara, lay bundled in quilts near the stove. Candlelight danced shadows on the ceiling, flickering like hope that refused to die. The wind raged, windows trembled, but inside, the silence between them pulsed with quiet strength. Maisie reached for Juliet's hand. Mara curled against Eli's chest. No one spoke. No one needed to. And in that fragile silence, something extraordinary bloomed. Mara sat up slowly, her eyes flicking to her sister. Then, with a courage forged in love, she began to hum. A single note, soft and clear, floated into the room like a memory returned. Maisie joined her, delicate and sure. Juliet's eyes widened. She knew this tune. It was the lullaby she'd once played on Eli's piano. They remembered. More than that, they were giving it back. Juliet added her voice, trembling, uncertain, harmonizing with their fragile melody. Eli listened, eyes misted. He couldn't find his voice, but the music filled the room and found the hidden corners of his soul. It wasn't polished. It wasn't rehearsed. It was sacred. And when the last note faded, the wind outside had stilled. The fire crackled gently. Eli exhaled, as if releasing the years of sorrow he'd been unknowingly holding. Morning dawned with the sky washed clean. Sunlight poured through the windows like a benediction. The barn stood firm. The trees, though bowed, had held. Inside the house, the scent of lavender, ash, and something new, something alive, hung in the air. Eli stood on the porch beside Juliet, steam curling from their coffee mugs. You think the roof held? She asked. Guess we'll find out. She leaned into him, shoulder brushing his. Whatever broke, we'll fix it. He looked at her long and quiet. You keep showing up, he said. Juliet smiled, eyes bright. So do you. They watched as the girls stepped into the snow, arms wide, faces upturned. Eli turned to Juliet again. You ever think maybe storms don't come to break us, but to clear the air for something better? Juliet slid her hand into his. All the time. The Willow Creek Christmas market bloomed like a memory. Wooden booths hugged the snowy park, dressed in evergreen garlands and soft golden lights. Wool scarves, cider sticky fingers, and the scent of cinnamon and pine turned the space into something between a festival and a prayer. Juliet tightened Maisie's scarf. Stay close, okay? There'll be more people than you're used to. The twins nodded silently, their mittened hands tucked protectively into her coat. They wore matching navy hats, each adorned with butterfly pins Eli had carved by hand. Behind their booth, Eli brushed sawdust from a rustic soap display. Last thing I need is to explain to Santa we lost 2 elves. Juliet smirked. Don't worry. We've rehearsed the emergency plan twice. Under the hand-carved sign, ashes and lavender, rows of wrapped soap sat nestled in linen. The centerpiece was a special blend, cedar, lavender, and vanilla, called Leah's Grace. A framed note read, This soap is more than soap. It's the scent of safety, of second chances, of music returning to a house that forgot how to sing. By noon, nearly everything had sold. Then he appeared. Tall, weathered, a man carved by time, wrapped in a dark coat and scarf, a violin case in one hand. He paused at the booth with an uncanny stillness. Juliet stepped forward. Can I help you? He didn't respond immediately. He picked up a bar of Leah's Grace, turned it in his hands, then looked past her at the girls. Maisie and Mara had gone utterly still. "Who are they?" he asked. Eli moved closer. "Is there a reason you're asking?" The man didn't blink. "They look like someone I used to know." Juliet spoke carefully. "They came to us last winter. We're their guardians now." "Do they speak?" "Not much," Juliet said, "but they remember." The man nodded. Then, slowly, he reached into his coat and handed Eli a faded photograph. Two small girls at a piano, faces unmistakable despite the years. Behind them, a woman with kind eyes and a braid. "My daughter," he said. "Her name was Willa. She died in a fire 5 years ago. I was overseas. I didn't even know she had children. The authorities told me the girls were presumed dead, but I never stopped looking." Juliet felt the ground tilt. Eli handed the photo back, his throat tight. "You're their grandfather." The man gave a slow nod. "Malcolm Yates. I used to teach violin in New York. Retired now." Mara stepped forward. Her hands trembled, but she reached into her coat and pulled out something small and precious. A drawing creased, worn, loved. A butterfly. A piano. Two girls beneath a tree. Malcolm took it with reverence. His eyes filled as he sank onto a bench. Silent tears ran down his cheeks. Juliet knelt beside him. "They've been safe. We didn't know." He nodded. "No, you did what I couldn't. You kept them whole." He looked at Eli. "What happens now?" Eli breathed deeply. "That's not for me to decide." Malcolm turned to the girls. "Do you know who I am?" They looked at Juliet, then at Eli. Then Mara stepped forward and placed a small hand in Eli's. Juliet saw it clearly. The choice, not between blood and love, but between the past and the present. Malcolm bowed his head. "I don't want to take them. Just to be a part of whatever this is. If you'll let me." Eli nodded. "You're welcome here. As much as they'll allow." Juliet smiled through tears. "Welcome to Willow Creek." That night, the house smelled like pine and cinnamon again. The girls painted ornaments with their newfound grandfather. Now just Grandpa Mal. Eli watched from the kitchen, his chest rising with something he hadn't felt in years, peace. Juliet approached, eyes gentle. "You okay?" "Yeah," he said, almost surprised. "Because everything changed." She tilted her head. "Because everything clicked." He looked at her. "This is the miracle. The girls, finding them was fate. Choosing them, that part was ours." Snow began to fall outside, but this time, it felt more like a memory than a threat. Inside, the house was no longer just shelter. It was home. Whispers of a miracle. On a morning wrapped in the soft quiet of falling snow, after breakfast plates were cleared and laughter still lingered in the corners of the room, Juliet brought out a small box, plain on the outside, but cradling something far more delicate within. "I want you to see it first," she said softly, eyes resting on Eli. Inside were 2 silver lockets, simple, elegant, each etched with a pair of initials. One side held an M and M, and on the reverse, chosen, loved, always. The kind of words that made something inside you unravel in the best way. "We'll give them to the girls on Christmas," Juliet said, her voice a thread of hope and caution, "just in case." Eli understood without needing her to explain. In case life shifts again, in case something changes, but also in case it doesn't. He looked at her, his heart still amazed at its own ability to hold so much more than he thought possible. "I didn't think there'd be room in me for anything else." Juliet reached across the table, her fingertips brushing his. "Hearts grow, Eli," she said gently. "That's what they're made for." The girls darted through the room just then, chasing each other with leftover wrapping paper tubes, laughter trailing like music behind them. And for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, Eli didn't worry about what might break next. He was too busy holding on to what was whole. The Willow Creek Town Hall was transformed into something out of a snow globe. Twinkle lights danced along old wooden beams. A hand-carved nativity scene stood humbly by the doors, surrounded by fir branches and ribbon, as if even the wood itself had remembered how to breathe joy again. Inside, the air smelled like warm cider, pine, and cinnamon rolls, layered with the scent of shared history and stitched-together traditions. Backstage, Juliet knelt beside Maisie, smoothing her hair with trembling fingers. "You ready?" she whispered, and Maisie nodded. Mara reached over to adjust the bow on her sister's collar, then gave Juliet's hand a small squeeze. Not a squeeze of fear, but of quiet confidence, of presence. It had been Juliet's idea, just a gentle nudge during Thanksgiving dinner. Maybe the girls could perform a song at the town's annual Christmas recital, something simple. Eli had raised a brow, half expecting hesitation, but the girls had only nodded, together, in perfect understanding. No words, just trust. The recital itself was a patchwork of community and love, children in snowflake sweaters quoting scripture, teens playing slightly off-key violin duets, and elders spinning long-winded stories whose punchlines were often lost but whose warmth never was. Tonight, the final performance would come from the West family. Juliet had used the term casually days earlier, and Eli hadn't corrected her, hadn't even blinked. Now he stood by the piano, rubbing the back of his neck nervously. His charcoal vest fit snugly, sleeves rolled up. He hadn't faced a crowd like this since Mary's memorial. The room buzzed softly, filled with people who had loved him through grief, and now stood quietly hoping he'd found his way back. Juliet stepped beside him. "You okay?" "I'm just wondering how we got here." She followed his gaze over the filled seats and glowing faces. One good day at a time. "Do they really want to do this?" "They asked to go last," Juliet said, a proud little smile tugging at her lips. "I think they want to be remembered." "They already are," Eli murmured. The lights dimmed. Applause faded, and the names were announced, Maisie and Mara West, accompanied by Juliet Hale. No one questioned the surname. No one needed to. The girls stepped out, dressed in matching navy dresses, with crisp white collars. Tiny silver butterflies adorned the hems. The audience hushed, not out of confusion, but reverence. The girls weren't just beautiful. They were home. Juliet took her seat at the piano, her movements as fluid and warm as the melody she began to play. The same lullaby from that first winter, the one the girls had hummed back to her, note for note, without instruction. Only this time they sang. Their voices, light and pure, slipped into the room like snowflakes, fragile, individual, and breathtaking together. The words weren't complex, but they didn't need to be. Each note told the story of cold nights and warm hands, of silence breaking, of love mending what the world once forgot. It was music born of memory and rebirth. Eli stood in the wings, breath caught in his throat. He hadn't known his heart could feel this full. He hadn't known they could sing like that. The final note lingered in the air like a blessing. Then silence. And then thunderous applause. Malcolm Yates was the first to rise, clapping through tears. Michelle, the caseworker, followed. Then the mayor. Then the room. Juliet turned to the girls, her smile wet with tears. Maisie took Mara's hand and led her to center stage. They bowed together. The applause swelled again. Eli stepped forward, as if pulled by a cord. The girls ran to him without hesitation, throwing their arms around his waist. Juliet joined them, wrapping an arm around all three. Someone took a photo. Later, that image would hang in Willow Creek Town Hall, beneath a brass plate that simply read, "Christmas Miracle, 2023. That evening, beneath the glow of the living room tree, Juliet presented the girls with the lockets. Silver. Simple. Engraved inside in delicate script. Chosen. Loved. Always. Dad and Jules. Maisie opened hers first, blinked once, and then quietly wrapped her arms around Juliet's neck. Mara held hers to her chest and turned to Eli. She didn't speak, but her lips moved just once. Daddy. He felt it deep, like a thread pulling every broken piece back into place. Juliet leaned against his shoulder. "You still afraid?" Eli looked around the fire, the tree, the photograph on the fridge, now pinned by a magnet that read hope. "No," he whispered. "Not anymore." Outside, the world was still winter, but inside there was music again, and light, and for the first time in years, nothing was missing. Spring tiptoed into Willow Creek like a secret too precious to speak aloud. The snow retreated quietly. The creek behind Eli's house found its voice again. Crocuses pushed through soil that had known both frost and fire. In the barn, the scent of sawdust mingled with wild lavender. The soap table had become permanent now, fitted with shelves and new tools. A fresh sign hung overhead. Ashes and lavender. Established by Grace. Juliet had insisted on the last part. Grace, she said, wasn't just what saved us. It's what we chose. The house had changed too. It was no longer a shelter full of silence. It was alive, with little footsteps and music pouring through open windows. There were rain boots by the door, crayon drawings on the fridge, and a calendar smudged with hearts and glitter stars, and notes like field trip, pack snacks. Eli sang under his breath sometimes. He laughed more, cooked more, loved more. Not cautiously, not with fear, but fully. That morning, he stood on the porch sipping coffee, watching the girls run barefoot across the yard, chasing butterflies with nets Malcolm had given them for Easter. Malcolm was a constant now. He came on Sundays with his violin. Thursdays he taught them harmonies with Juliet. And on quiet afternoons, he'd sit by the creek, eyes closed, listening to music only his heart could hear. Inside, Juliet arranged journals on a bookshelf in their reading nook. One for each of them, blank pages ready for the stories yet to be written. She caught Eli's eye through the window and smiled. 3 months. That's how long it had been since the adoption papers had been signed. The girls had chosen the name West, and they had chosen them. That evening, Juliet lit candles on the porch and served dinner under twinkling lights. Handmade pasta, fresh bread, raspberry cobbler. They sat around the table as the sky turned from gold to indigo. To miracles, Juliet toasted. To soap, Maisie grinned. To music, Mara giggled. Eli raised his glass. And to the day 2 little girls changed everything. Juliet leaned in. You mean the day we let them? After dinner, as the girls curled on the couch with picture books, Juliet washed dishes beside Eli, their elbows brushing in rhythm. There's something I've been wanting to ask, she said, drying her hands. Eli raised an eyebrow. Sounds serious. She smiled, pulling a small wooden ring box from her apron. A butterfly and a musical note carved on the lid. Inside, 2 hand-forged silver rings. I'm not asking for a wedding, she whispered. I'm asking for a life. One where we keep choosing each other. He stared at her, then took one ring, slipped it onto her finger, and said, Juliet Hale, I choose you. Every ordinary, miraculous day. Later, wrapped in a quilt on the porch swing, they watched the stars blink above the trees. The wind whispered through the pines. Do you ever think about how unlikely this was? She asked. Every day, Eli said. A letter under a floorboard. A blanket in the snow. 2 silent girls who turned everything upside down. Juliet smiled. I used to think miracles were loud, grand, and now, she whispered. I think they whisper. I think they choose us. She looked down at her locket, still warm against her chest. Chosen, loved, always. She had never believed in anything more. Months later, the last words of this story were written not by Juliet or Eli, but by 2 girls who no longer felt lost. We were never lost girls. We were waiting to be found by the right people. The miracle wasn't that they saved us. The miracle was we saved each other. Wherever you're watching this from, whether it's the hush of a morning coffee or the quiet glow of midnight, thank you. If this story touched your heart, share it. Subscribe. Join a community that still believes in kindness, in healing, in the quiet power of second chances. Because sometimes, the miracle isn't the one that knocks. It's the one that waits, until your heart is finally ready to open the door.